The year was 2412. Humanity didn't go to the stars to conquer. We went because we were starving. Earth was a fading memory of green, and the United Earth Coalition was desperate for Isogen 5, the violet fuel that kept our colony ships screaming through the void. We found it on Krios 4, a world of eternal twilight and neon blue rain. To our engineers, it was a resource node. To our soldiers, it was a muddy hellhole. But we didn't know, not then, that the Korthari were already there. The Korthari did not live on the surface. They lived in the deep silicate caverns, emerging only to honor their dead. You see, the Isogen 5 we were drilling for wasn't just a mineral to them. It was the crystallized essence of their ancestors. Every drill bit we sank into the crust was a spear through their history. The war wasn't about politics. It was about a misunderstanding so deep that no diplomat could bridge it. For 10 years, we fought a race of 8-foot-tall giants with skin like obsidian and hearts bound by an ancient code of honor we couldn't even begin to comprehend. The rain on Krios 4 didn't just fall, it wept. Corporal Elias Thorne stood at the edge of the perimeter fence, his boots sinking 6 inches into the thick neon blue sludge that passed for soil on this god-forsaken rock. He was 28 years old, but in the reflection of his cracked visor, he looked 50. His eyes were bloodshot, rimmed with the permanent exhaustion that comes from being the only medic for a unit that was being picked apart day by shadows in the mist. "Thorne, report!" The voice crackled in his ear. Captain Miller, harsh, brittle, the sound of a man who had lost too many soldiers to care about the ones who were still breathing. Elias keyed his mic, his voice a dry rasp. "Perimeter is clear, Captain. The prisoner is stable." "Stable?" Miller's scoff was audible over the rain. "He's a walking tank, Thorne. Keep him weak. If he starts looking like he can stand up, cut his rations again. We need him alive for the interrogation, not comfortable." Elias didn't respond. He couldn't. He turned his gaze toward the center of the camp, where a heavy-duty containment cage sat under a flickering floodlight. Inside sat Vaughn. The alien was a mountain of broken stone. His obsidian skin, usually polished and gleaming in Korthari rituals, was now dull and covered in a layer of gray grime. His 4 eyes, large amber orbs, were closed. He looked like a statue forgotten in a graveyard. Elias approached the bars. The hum of the energy field made the hair on his arms stand up. He looked at the nutrition tray at the base of the cage. It was untouched. The synthetic nutrient paste the Coalition provided was offensive to Korthari biology, but more than that, Vaughn was choosing to starve. He was choosing a slow exit over a forced confession. Elias reached into his medkit. Underneath the bandages and the sterile injectors, hidden in a secret compartment, was a small plastic-wrapped bundle. It was a ration of real flour bread, dry, tasteless, and hard as a rock, but it was human food. It was a piece of home. Elias looked around. The camp was a ghost town of tents and mud. The sentries were focused on the tree line, terrified of the Korthari snipers. No one was looking at the medic. He knelt in the mud, the cold soaking through his fatigues. He didn't speak. He simply unwrapped the bread and pushed it through the narrow gap in the physical bars, just past the stinging edge of the energy field. For a long time, nothing happened. The only sound was the rhythmic thud-thud of the Isogen drills in the distance.
Then a low tectonic rumble vibrated from the cage. Vaughn's eyes opened. They weren't just yellow, they were deep, glowing pits of ancient intelligence. He looked at the bread, then he looked at Elias. In that moment, the power imbalance was clear. Elias was the captor, armed and free. Vaughn was the prisoner, shackled and dying. And yet, as Elias stared into those alien eyes, he felt like the small one. He felt like a child standing before a thunderstorm. "Eat," Elias whispered, his breath fogging in the cold air. "Please, if you die, they'll just bring in someone worse to replace me, someone who won't use the good bandages." Vaughn didn't move for a heartbeat. Then a massive three-fingered hand reached out. The movements were slow, agonizingly cautious. The alien picked up the small piece of bread with a delicacy that seemed impossible for a creature of his size. He didn't eat it. He held it to his face, sniffing the scent of yeast and earth soil. A strange melodic hum escaped his throat, a sound so lonely it made Elias's chest ache. "Ora," Vaughn rumbled. The voice was like tectonic plates grinding together. Elias frowned. "I don't know that word, big guy, but keep it down. If they hear us talking, it's over for both of us." Elias stood up, wiping the blue mud from his knees. He turned to walk away, but a sudden sharp metallic clank stopped him. He looked back. Vaughn had placed his hand against the energy bars, ignoring the blue sparks that danced across his obsidian skin. He was watching Elias walk away, his amber eyes burning with something that wasn't hatred. It was the first crack in the wall of the war.
For the next 5 nights, the ritual remained the same. The camp would fall into a restless slumber, the only sounds being the distant rhythmic thump of the isogen drills and the occasional hiss of a steam vent. Elias would wait until the flickering shadow of the sentry passed his tent before slipping out into the blue mud. Each night, he brought a small portion of his own meal, a piece of protein leather, a crust of bread, or a handful of dried fruit. He was essentially starving himself, his own ribs beginning to show beneath his medic's vest, but he didn't stop.
"I saw the reports today, Vaughn. They're moving a heavy interrogation unit here by the end of the week. People who don't care about stable. They want the coordinates for your high command, and they'll take them piece by piece."
Inside the cage, the giant alien didn't move. He sat cross-legged, his massive obsidian shoulders nearly touching the ceiling of the containment unit. But his eyes, those burning amber orbs, followed Elias's every movement. Vaughn took the bread. This time he didn't sniff it. He ate it in a single slow bite, his jaw grinding with a sound like crushing gravel. As he finished, he reached out a single finger, tapping the metal floor of the cage twice. Clink, clink. It was a signal, a recognition. Suddenly, the beam of a high-intensity flashlight cut through the rain, splashing across the bars of the cage. Elias froze, his heart hammering against his chest like a trapped bird.
"Thorn, what the hell are you doing out of your bunk?" Elias didn't turn around immediately. He shoved his empty hands into his pockets, praying the darkness would hide the crumbs on his sleeves. He turned slowly, squinting against the glare.
"Checking his vitals, Captain. The humidity is spiking. Korthari lungs are prone to silica buildup in this weather. I don't want him suffocating before your specialists arrive."
Captain Miller stepped forward, his heavy combat boots splashing neon blue sludge onto Elias's shins. He looked at the medic, then at the prisoner. Vaughn had retreated into the shadows of the cage, his eyes dimming to a dull, threatening glow.
"You're a soft one, Thorn. Always have been. Just remember, that thing in there would snap your spine like a dry twig if those bars weren't electrified. It's not a patient. It's a weapon we've put in a box. Get back to your tent. Now." Elias walked away, feeling Miller's eyes on his back. As he reached the edge of the light, he heard a sound, a low, vibrating growl from the cage. It wasn't a threat, it was a warning directed at Miller, a sound of protectiveness that no human had ever heard from a Corthari.
He felt a strange, desperate urge to show someone, not Miller, who would call it a security risk, not the other soldiers who would laugh at his sentimentality. He needed to show the one person who understood what it meant to be a prisoner of this war. He returned to the cage an hour before dawn. The rain had turned to a light mist. Elias sat on an upturned crate just outside the energy field's reach and pulled out the photo.
Look, this is home. That's my mother. And that's Leo, my little brother. He's probably your height by now, though I doubt he's as heavy. I'm talking to him like he's a friend. Why am I doing this? He's the enemy. His people killed my entire platoon at the second ridge. But when I look at him, I don't see the high vicar. I see a father who's never going back to his kids. I see a man who's dying for a pile of purple rocks.
Elias held the photo up to the bars. Vaughn leaned forward, his massive face coming inches from the energy field. The blue sparks hissed, reflecting in his amber eyes.
Green. We call that color green. It means life. It means things are growing. We don't have much of it left.
Vaughn reached out. This time, his hand didn't go for the bread. He placed a single obsidian finger against the transparent plastic of the photo. He moved it gently over the faces of Elias's family. Then the alien looked up, staring directly into Elias's soul. He tapped his own chest, then pointed to the photo, and finally pointed to Elias.
Ora, Dawn, Ora.
The word hung in the air, vibrating through the metal of the cage.
He said my name, or close to it, Aura. It sounds like a prayer. It sounds like brother. He's not looking at the photo anymore. He's looking at me. For the first time in 3 years of war, I don't feel like a soldier. I don't feel like a medic. I just feel human.
In that silent exchange, the war on Krios 4 became irrelevant. There was no coalition, there was no legion. There was only a medic and a prisoner, bound together by the image of a world they were both afraid they would never see again. The peace of the neon blue nights was shattered on the 7th day. A heavy lift dropship descended through the thick clouds of Krios 4, its thrusters screaming as it pushed aside the rain. It wasn't carrying supplies. It was carrying the Coalition's Special Intelligence Unit, the men the soldiers called the Inquisitors. They stepped off the ramp in black, pressurized suits, their faces hidden behind mirrored visors. At their lead was a man named Major Thorne, no relation to Elias, though he shared the same cold, human efficiency. He didn't look at the mud. He didn't look at the tired soldiers. He looked directly at the cage. Corporal Elias, I've read your medical logs. You've kept the High Vicar alive. Acceptable. Now step aside. We're going to extract the coordinates for the Corthari nest before the next moon cycle. Elias stood his ground for a heartbeat too long. He looked at Vaughn. The alien had stood up, his massive obsidian frame casting a long, jagged shadow over the mud. Vaughn's amber eyes weren't glowing with warmth anymore. They were fixed on the black-clad men and the heavy, jagged devices they were dragging toward the cage.
Major, the prisoner is barely stable. If you use nerval drills on a Corthari in this state of malnutrition, his nervous system will collapse. You won't get coordinates. They'll get a corpse.
The Major stopped. He didn't look at Elias. He looked at the cage, his mirrored visor reflecting the blue sparks of the energy field.
The interrogation never began. At exactly 0300 hours, the atmosphere of Krios 4 didn't just vibrate, it screamed. A low, melodic hum started in the distance, a sound like 1,000 cellos playing a single mourning note. It was the Corthari war song. Then the sky turned white. An orbital strike hit the isogen drills 3 miles to the east, the shockwave tearing through the camp and flattening the tents like paper. Blue mud exploded into the air, turning into a blinding mist. The sirens began to wail, a high, shrill sound that signaled the end of the world.
Contact! They're in the wire! Korthari Legion is in the wire!
The camp turned into a slaughterhouse of shadows. Huge obsidian shapes moved through the smoke with terrifying speed. The human guards fired blindly, their slug throwers barking into the fog, but the Korthari were ghosts in the blue rain. Captain Miller's voice tore through the tom channel, distorted by static and fear.
Full retreat! Abandon the supplies! Get to the extraction valley! If it doesn't have a heartbeat, leave it behind!
Elias was thrown into the Kichad by a nearby blast. His ears were ringing, the taste of copper in his mouth. He looked up and saw the Inquisitors running for the dropship, their expensive equipment abandoned in the mud. He looked at the cage. The energy field was flickering, the power grid failing as the camp's generators were hit. Vaughn was slamming his massive shoulder against the bars, but the magnetic locks were holding. He was trapped in a metal box while his own people rained fire from the sky. Elias didn't think. He didn't calculate the risk of treason. He stood up, his medic bag heavy on his shoulder, and ran against the tide of fleeing soldiers. He reached the cage just as a Korthari mortar hit the command tent 50 yards away.
Vaughn, stay back from the door!
Elias pulled the laser cutter from his belt. The tool was meant for cutting through armor to reach wounds, but it worked on locks just as well. He pressed the humming blade against the magnetic housing. Blue sparks showered his face, stinging his skin, but he didn't flinch. Clack! The lock gave way. The heavy iron door swung open on rusted hinges. Elias looked at the giant. Vaughn stepped out of the cage, his full height finally revealed. He towered over Elias, a mountain of obsidian and muscle. Around them, the camp was burning, the blue rain turning into steam.
Go. Run to the tree line. Your people are there. Just go.
Vaughn didn't run. He looked down at the small human who had fed him, protected him, and now saved him. Amidst the fire and the screams, the giant reached out and grabbed Elias by the tactical vest, pulling him into a crushing, bone-deep embrace. It was a gesture of such raw, alien gratitude that it knocked the air from Elias's lungs. Vaughn pulled away, his amber eyes burning with a new light. He pressed something small and hard into Elias's palm, a jagged piece of obsidian from his own shoulder plate.
Aura, Thorn, live.
And then he was gone, a shadow disappearing into the blue smoke. Elias stood alone in the mud of a dying camp, clutching a piece of his enemy's skin as the human army retreated into the dark.
The extraction point was a lie. The valley of Krios 4 was a jagged scar in the planet's crust, surrounded by towering obsidian cliffs that bled neon blue water. It was a dead end. The 30 human survivors, the remnants of a battalion once 500 strong, huddled together under a makeshift tarp. Their weapons were jammed with grit, their medkits were empty, and their hope had evaporated with the morning mist. Captain Miller stood at the mouth of the narrow pass, his armor cracked and his eyes hollow. He looked less like a leader and more like a ghost haunted by his own failures. Every few seconds, he glanced back at Elias, who was busy bandaging a young soldier's shattered leg with strips of a tattered tent. "You're very quiet, Thorn, even for a man who's about to watch us all die." Elias didn't look up. His hands were steady despite the cold. He could feel the jagged piece of obsidian Vaughn had given him, the aura stone, burning against his chest through his tunic.
There isn't much to say, Captain. We're out of ammo, out of time, and the Korthari Legion is less than a mile behind us. We do our jobs until the end. That's the only thing left.
Miller stepped closer, the mud squelching under his boots. He pointed a shaking finger at the empty cage key on Elias's belt.
"I saw the lock, Thorn. I saw it before the command tent went up. It wasn't blown open by a mortar. It was cut, clean. You let that monster go. You traded our only leverage for a handshake from a beast. If we die here, their blood is on your hands."
The other soldiers looked up.
their faces pale in the blue twilight. A murmur of suspicion began to ripple through the group. In the desperate silence of the valley, a scapegoat was the only thing they had left to feed on. Elias finally looked up, his eyes meeting Miller's with a hardness the captain hadn't expected.
I didn't trade leverage, Captain. I saved a life. If that's a crime on Earth, then I'm a traitor. But on this rock, it was the only human thing left to do.
Before Miller could respond, the ground began to vibrate. It wasn't the rhythmic thump of a drill. It was a rhythmic, heavy strike. Thump, thump, thump. 500 feet hitting the earth in perfect unison.
The fog at the mouth of the valley didn't just drift. It parted like a curtain. First, there was the light. Not the flickering neon blue of the rain, but a deep golden glow emanating from 500 energy shields. Then came the shadows, huge obsidian-skinned giants clad in ceremonial bone armor, their spears held high, their faces obscured by the terrifying, jagged masks of the High Vicar's Guard. The human soldiers scrambled to their feet, clutching empty rifles and rusted knives. They were mice facing a mountain. Captain Miller drew his sidearm, his hand trembling so violently the barrel danced in the air. "This is it. Form a line. Make them pay for every inch."
But the Legion didn't charge. At exactly 50 paces, the 500 warriors halted. The sound was like a thunderclap, echoing off the obsidian cliffs. The rhythmic drumming of their spears against their shields stopped instantly, leaving a silence so profound it felt heavy. Then, the center of the Legion's line divided. A single figure stepped forward. He was taller than the others, his armor etched with ancient Kothari script that pulsed with a faint amber light. He carried no weapon. In his massive, three-fingered hand, he held a small, crumpled object that looked entirely out of place in a war zone. It was a photograph. Elias stepped forward, pushing past the captain. He knew that gait. He knew the way those amber eyes caught the light.
Vaughn.
Vaughn reached the front of the line. He looked at the human survivors, then at the terrified Captain Miller. Then he looked at Elias. With a movement that was both regal and humble, the High Vicar turned his back on the humans. He didn't face his prisoners. He faced his own legion. Vaughn slammed his foot into the blue mud and let out a roar, a sound that wasn't a war cry, but a command. In perfect synchronicity, the 500 Kothari warriors turned around. They formed a semicircle around the humans, their shields interlocking, their spears pointed outward toward the rest of the Kothari army emerging from the mist. They weren't there to capture. They were there to protect. "This small one gave me bread when I was hollow. He gave me light when the world was dark. He is Aura. He is kin. To strike him is to strike the Legion. To spill his blood is to spill mine." The human soldiers stood in stunned silence. For the first time in 10 years of war, they weren't looking at monsters. They were looking at a wall of obsidian brothers. Captain Miller's pistol lowered. He looked at the 500 energy shields protecting his men, then at Elias. He saw the piece of obsidian in Elias's hand glowing in sync with Vaughn's armor.
Thorn, what have you done?
I didn't start a war, Captain. I think I just ended one.
Across the valley, the remaining Kothari forces stopped their advance. They saw the High Vicar's Guard standing in defense of the enemy. They saw the bread oath in action. The spears of the attacking force lowered. One by one, the energy shields of the invaders dimmed. The neon blue rain continued to fall, but for the first time on Krios 4, it didn't feel like tears. It felt like a cleansing.
The stalemate in the valley lasted for 3 days. 3 days where 500 Kothari warriors stood as a living wall between the human survivors and the wrath of an empire. During those days, something impossible happened.
The human soldiers, once paralyzed by fear, began to see the giants not as monsters, but as guardians. They shared what little they had left, stories of home, scraps of conversation, and the silence of mutual survival. But the deepest bond remained between the medic and the High Vicar. On the morning of the fourth day, a coalition evacuation frigate descended. It didn't come with guns blazing. It came under a flag of truce negotiated by Vaughn's own people. Elias stood at the ramp of the ship, his medic bag slung over a shoulder that felt lighter than it had in years. Vaughn stood before him, the amber light of his eyes reflecting the pale dawn of Krios 4. The High Vicar reached into his ceremonial collar and pulled out a small, pulsating blue crystal. It was warm to the touch, humming with a frequency that felt like a heartbeat. Thorn. This is my Sirka, my essence. As long as it glows, I walk the path. If you call, the Legion answers. Elias took the crystal. It was more than a gift, it was a promise. In return, Elias reached into his pocket and pulled out the worn, muddy photograph of his family. He placed it into Vaughn's massive palm. It's just paper, Vaughn, but on my world, it's how we remember who we are. Keep it, so you remember that not all of us came here to destroy. The giant closed his hand over the small photo with a reverence usually reserved for ancient relics. He touched his forehead to Elias's in the traditional Korthari gesture of eternal brotherhood. No words were needed. The debt was paid, and a new history had begun. As the frigate rose into the atmosphere, Elias looked out the viewport. He didn't see a battlefield. He saw 500 warriors watching the ship disappear, their spears raised not in threat, but in salute.
20 years passed. The War of the Ancestors, as it came to be known, was taught in history books as the moment humanity almost lost its soul, only to find it in the hands of a single corporal. Krios 4th was no longer a mud-soaked hell. It was a sovereign sanctuary, the first world where human and Korthari lived in a delicate, beautiful peace. On a quiet hill in the countryside of Earth, an old man sat on a wooden porch. Elias Thorne's hair was white now, his hands gnarled by time, but his eyes were still as sharp as the day he first stepped into the blue rain. On a chain around his neck hung the blue crystal. It had never stopped glowing. His grandson, a boy of 7, sat at his feet, staring at the sky.
Grandpa, tell me about the giants again. Tell me about the bread.
Elias smiled, his hand drifting to the crystal.
It wasn't about the bread, Leo. It was about seeing someone when the rest of the world chose to look away.
Suddenly, the crystal around Elias's neck flared with a brilliant, blinding amber light. The air grew heavy with the scent of ozone and distant rain. A low, melodic hum vibrated through the floorboards of the porch, a sound Elias hadn't heard in 2 decades but would know anywhere. The crystal hums loudly. The air crackles with ozone. A deep, melodic war song hum grows from the sky. High above the green fields of Earth, the clouds parted. A massive, obsidian-hulled ship, etched with glowing amber runes, descended slowly from the stars. It didn't carry weapons. It carried a message of reunion. Elias stood up, his old bones creaking but his heart racing with the fire of a young medic. He walked to the edge of the porch as the great ship touched down, its ramp lowering to reveal a towering figure clad in the robes of a king. Vaughn stepped onto the grass of Earth. In his hand, encased in a frame of indestructible Korthari glass, was a small, faded photograph of a family standing in the green. The High Vicar looked at the green trees, the blue sky, and finally at his brother. He pounded his fist against his chest and let out a roar of joy that echoed across the valley. Vaughn's joyful, thunderous roar echoes. Thorn, the bread is shared.
Leo laughed, tears streaming down his face. He looked at his grandson, then back at the giant who had traveled across the stars just to say hello. The war was a ghost. The mud was gone. Humanity had gone to the stars to find fuel. Instead, we found ourselves.
And it all started with a single ration.